Life Rhythms with Ryan Skyy. Observing the world around me, looking inward, trying to make sense of it all.
Welcome to Life Rhythms Radio Show. I'm your host, Ryan Skyy. This episode is brought to you by Mixillery.com. I'm excited to have Mixillery on as a sponsor personally because Mixillery is all about helping facilitate connecting people who are looking to hire a remixer. It's a platform that you can use to find and hire someone to remix your song. And why that's so important is because anybody can go online and you can search and you can see music producers, you can search for remixers, you can hire somebody. But it's like, how much do you pay them and who should you hire and which genre should you choose? And with option overload, it can be a little overwhelming to figure out what's the best use of your money. Because what it comes down to is that remixes are marketing tools. A remix of a record will get that record in front of a larger audience. It will get that record played in venues and areas like the gym or a club or a car or a fitness studio, places that maybe your original song may not be appropriate for. So it is an important marketing tool, but then who remixes it is important because the first of all, the quality of the remix, and also maybe they have their own audience that's going to discover this remix. Maybe they have a following. Maybe they have a radio show. Maybe they tour and they'll be playing it out live. These are all sorts of things that are important. So Mixillery is a service that will help match you with the best remixer for your budget. So check out Mixillery.com for more information on this. Life Rhythms is a radio show that revolves around my personal growth journey. As a DJ and a producer, I spend a lot of my time observing the world around me, looking inward, trying to make sense of it all. I've been doing it in song form, and now I do it with my radio show. Each episode of Life Rhythms, we feature one guest and one song or album. And I choose a topic around the music for that artist that we talk about during their interview. I'm excited for today because I have Vancouver Canadian DJ and electronic music producer Felix Cartal joining us. And Felix, he has an album out called Into Sunsets. And it's a collection of 11 songs. And I'm excited to have him on today because he's uniquely a good fit for Adobe Radio family because we have people that listening in that are into the electronic music scene, but also the core of the network here is the pop and the punk and that sort of punk world. And Felix got his start in the punk world. And so we're going to talk about how electronic dance music and punk, how those scenes they're kind of like kindred spirits, how they relate to each other. We're going to also talk about the album Into Sunsets. We're going to feature some of the songs on the album. We're going to talk about kind of like what it's like, the creativity process of the highs and lows and of life and how that affects you. And also what it's like being a struggling artist, roughing it out, and the way that Felix approaches creativity and releasing music and how he's navigated his career. We're going to dive into all this. We're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, I'm going to bring Felix on and we'll dive into this topic and his music right after this break on Adobe Radio. Welcome back to Life Rhythms Radio Show. I am your host, Ryan Skyy. I've got my guest with me today, Felix Cartal. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. How's it going?
Good. We're glad to have you on the show today. We're featuring your album Into Sunsets.
I appreciate you for having me and for featuring the album.
I love the vibe of this album. So I want to tell listeners right away, I want them to understand what we're going to be covering today. So this album, it's a 11 song collection.
Correct.
And these are songs that you've previously released, but they're remixes. Like you've remixed your own records.
Yes, exactly.
Right? And then with the exception, there's one additional song on there, Dan Mangin's Just Know It, and you did a remix for that, and he won the Juno Award.
Yeah, that one actually
was nominated.
out earlier as well, but the remix for Too Late is brand new, and then the Love You More one is also very new. And then there's two kind of like instrumental, smaller tracks on the album to kind of add some flow to the whole thing.
Yeah, tie it together. Were you remixing your records before you put this out? Just kind of like your own private mixes for live shows?
Yeah, it definitely, you're kind of hitting the nail on the head there. It sort of stems with the idea of, okay, I always want to like tweak these records a little bit for what I think can serve the dance floor a little bit. And then from there, I think I kind of started really enjoying things that are a bit more in the chill dance headspace. So I kind of like wanted to almost like reimagine my songs in ways that felt almost, if people would heard the original and the remix, they almost wouldn't be 100% sure if it's even a remix. So I really wanted them to be able to stand alone.
Because some of them kind of have their own vibe. It's almost like you've reimagined some of the tracks.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think for me, I love just taking a lyric or something from the original song that I love and kind of trying to like reimagine that with some new chords or something, and then seeing if that can almost give it a new meaning or kind of, so sometimes the original might feel more positive, and then I'm like, oh, if I take this one phrase and put it over some sadder chords, it might sort of like flip the kind of way you feel about it. And I always just found that really interesting when making music.
And I like that you're kind of pulling the curtain back a little bit for your fans on social media, and you're showing them, like, for instance, the post you did about the chord progressions, about how you can just make slight tweaks to the chord progressions, and then you show visually, I don't know how you did that, but it looks great in terms of like me following along, but you show how the slight tweaks in chord progressions, what it sounds like as a whole, and then you talk about how that isn't, as long as it like that becomes interesting to you, and then that's something you want to put in the track.
Totally. Yeah. You explained that better than I think I explained it when I made the video. So thank you. And I appreciate you commenting on that. It was easy to follow because those were shockingly hard to make. Cause I feel like when creating stuff about showing off sort of my process in my head, I'm like, this makes sense to me. But then I show it to somebody else, I'm like, I don't know if it makes sense what I'm thinking now, showing that visually to them. So that's kind of been fun for me in a challenge as well, just trying to explain kind of how I approach music and then represent that in like a cool way on social media. But they can be frustrating too, a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah, I can imagine, because in a short video, you're trying to verbally and visually communicate to people chord progressions, what it looks like visually, how it sounds, and then also like the kind of the traditional approach of the four chord progressions, but then also if you build it out to like 8 chord progression, because you're making slight tweaks, what that looks like, what that sounds like. And then I think you even you were keeping time with some sort of visual, right?
Yeah.
Like metronome kind of a thing, so people could kind of see the syncopations of the chords.
Totally. Yeah.
Right.
And it took me way longer in the editing room than I expected.
Yeah.
But also I kind of felt like the other inspiration behind doing those was sort of, I feel like I see those videos sometimes from other people being like, this is how I made this track, but then I don't actually get anything out of it. They're like, first I added drums, then I added bass, then I added chords. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I can hear all those. I want to know a specific thing that is interesting to the producer, because I always feel whenever I've gotten to work with other artists or producers that I like to work with, my favorite stuff is when they tell me some random thing that just like scratches their like itch from a producer level. And so I was like trying to zone in on the things that are interesting to me rather than like, here's how you make a whole track. Like everyone knows how to make a whole track. Let's focus on one little tidbit that's interesting to me.
Yeah. And who do you think, I'm curious, when you're making these videos, who might the target be? I mean, because I know a producer is obviously going to appreciate it, but I'm curious also about kind of the novice, somebody who doesn't know anything about music production.
Yeah, I think I've tried to make my things more niche as I've gone along lately, because I think sometimes this idea of making something for everyone is sort of silly to me. Yeah. So I always try to be like I'm gonna try to make something for someone similar to me. Like these are the things that I'm interested in, and hopefully my like visual interest in those things is then interesting, and people kind of will comment things, and I think that also helps guide like, oh, that would be actually a cool thing to showcase. So it's a little bit of a conversation with people that follow them, and I don't know, sometimes it's just fun for me too to try to write out my process, because it makes me sort of learn about Oh, like that is how I'm thinking about that. That can actually help serve my songwriting in the future too. So I think it's like beneficial on multiple levels, which is why I have fun doing them.
Yeah, it's causing you to synthesize what's happening in real time and then kind of like figuring out how to teach this to somebody else. When I first moved to LA, I was teaching piano and I taught autistic kids, a music program for autistic kids. And I noticed that when I had to break things down and actually teach for the first time, I learned a lot more myself.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that makes total sense to me because you don't really think about how, like once you have to explain it to someone, it's totally different from your understanding of it. That's innate, I guess.
Yeah, because they ask you questions that you're like, I never really thought about that because I just kind of knew instinctually, right? But then when you actually have to think and communicate it, that's why free speech is so important. Like people talk about free speech because speaking is thinking, right? And speaking is our way. Like you and I are talking right now, and through words, we're working out concepts and we're synthesizing ideas and we're coming to understandings, right?
Yeah.
And that happens also in teaching. So I pulled up your list because we were talking about how you remixed your track, some of your songs for your album Into Sunsets, and some of this the wordings that you use here is Felix Cartal Sunset Mix, Chill Mix, Late Night Mood Mix. These are kind of the vibes of this album. Yeah.
It's sunset mixes is kind of the general theme, but to be honest, the ones that were chill and late night, those were kind of the earlier remixes I did, and then I kind of, as I was going along, I wanted a sort of a way to brand all these things, and we kind of, sunset just felt right of like the mood where it's kind of euphoric and beautiful and chill at the same time. So it was kind of a progression, and then I think I just wanted to kind of package that idea and sort of showcase that I've done all these. Even for me, when we were looking through which songs to put on the record, I was like, I don't think we have enough for a whole record. There's only 3 or 4. And then we kind of went through them and I'm like, oh man, there's 7 or 8. So I had even forgotten about some of the ones I'd done. So it was a cool idea to try to like put them all together in a way that sort of freshened it up, but also sort of, I really believe in this concept of like the vibe of these songs. So I really wanted to like put them all together so that people can sort of see the vision that I had 4 years ago when I did the very first one. About see this all going. So, and otherwise you have to like put them on a playlist yourself or something. So it's nice to kind of like put it all together with a bow, package it how I want, and be like, this is the concept. Yeah.
And for listeners that are tuning in for the first time to this music by Felix, because I'm sure there's some newbies listening, your music has changed a lot over the years. Because I was, and I want to highlight this because we are on Adobe Radio, and the Adobe network has multiple genre stations, but the core of Adobe is kind of the pop punk alternative side of things. And when I was looking into your background of like when you first got started and how you began playing bass in a punk and hardcore scene.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I was reading about you that I found interesting was once you started to experiment with music production and club music, you started to see that there was a similarity between the punk and the EDM scenes.
100%.
I would love to learn more about that. Yeah. Because I'm with you on that. I agree with you. And I want to highlight that for our listeners because I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think there are 2 really big similarities that as I've done it, they've just become more and more clear to me. And one is from a crowd reaction space where I find dance shows and playing in punk bands to be really similar, where you're sort of after a really visceral reaction from the crowd. And it feels good to kind of get that back. And there is kind of this community, and, the music is different, or maybe even punk can have this sort of like rage element, but I don't know. You could make that argument for certain types of dance music too. But the point is, I feel like people really are kind of expressing how they feel about the music in a very visual way, where you could see someone enjoying music rather than just kind of sitting there. And that is very encouraging as a performer, because as their energy goes up, I want to match it. And it just, that's how you get these really high energy moments at shows that are just look insane and are awesome. And I think that's kind of how dance music made an impact, because the shows will just kind of grow and grow to these insane moments where everyone is like rising together. And I've always felt that same thing at punk shows, where I don't know, it's a mosh pit or whatever it is, but this sea of people like moving together is very similar in those scenes.
Yeah. And then there's an aggressiveness at times.
Totally. But not like, even like, not in a negative way, just in a letting it out kind of way. It's like in a freeing way. And not like judging people too. I think that's another thing that I've really noticed. Like there's not a lot of judgment in either of those scenes, where people are kind of like, be yourself. And I've always really related to that. And I hope that's something that people think when they come to my shows, that they can just be who they want to be and have a good time and hopefully meet other like-minded people. But I will say on the flip side, from the opposite of a show perspective, from a production level, I would say dance music felt very similar to punk rock in the sense of how DIY it was. It was very do-it-yourself. There was when I started, there was no YouTube even. It was just download software illegally and figure it out. And, I made my first records on Logitech speakers that I bought from London, like from Best Buy, and for $30. And I stole the program from my high school last year, Reason, and made music on all these things. And it wasn't so much about thinking, is this being like done the right way? It was more, let's just make what we can with what we have. And I really tried to like maintain that sort of impulsiveness. And I think I struggle with being a perfectionist on some level, but like the punk rock in me wants to be like, just keep making stuff and like, it'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. That when I listen to the punk music and even like pop punk, there's elements, like there's a songwriting element, but then there's also, as you said, the DIY element. There's kind of like, can be a little bit of aggressiveness, but then it's melodic. Mm-hmm. But it does all come down to the energy. And early in your career, like some of your early records, you had worked with some unconventional vocalists. Yeah,
definitely some people that I couldn't believe. I got to work with Johnny Whitney, who was in a band called the Blood Brothers, which was one of my favorite bands growing up. And he collabed on my first album, which was crazy for me. Like it was, I don't know if I've ever had a more starstruck moment in my entire life, because I had nothing at that point. And I just signed to Steve Aoki's label, Dim Mak, and I think he kind of somehow finessed the like reaching out. They might have had some sort of connection to that label at some point. And yeah, so that blew my mind, because I used to go to their shows all the time and I would see them. And then he did a vocal for my record, which was so crazy. So crazy.
Take me back to when I think it was 2009 with Dim Mak, one of your first signing. Take me back there. How did you get to that point? How did that come about?
I was in college and in university at UBC, University of British Columbia, and just kind of, my band had broken up and I was just kind of messing around with software, just having fun. And kind of at that era, it was sort of, I guess Justice probably put out their record around 2007. I think that was when Cross came out. And that stuff really like flipped my brain on electronic music, because it sort of before that, like you think of techno and you think of a very specific thing, and even like dress code and stuff. When you would have to go to nightclubs, like wear a button-up shirt and like dress shoes, and all that stuff just felt whack to me. I was like, what? You have to wear a certain type of shirt to go to a nightclub? So Justice kind of came out, and it was sort of like flipped it on its head, where like these guys were rock stars, kind of made it like kind of like they felt like a band when you would see them, but they were DJing. So that kind of like flipped my brain a little bit and made me a little more excited to try to make stuff. And I just kind of kept making random records, and blogs were just starting. So I got a couple songs on blogs, and just from there, it kind of got distributed on the internet in its weird way that the internet existed in 2007, I guess. And I eventually started talking to Steve on MySpace. Someone had like sent him one of the records and he said he liked it. So we signed a deal. And then from there, I was with them for, God, I don't know, 8 or 9 years or something.
And Steve has also been at that intersection of punk.
Yeah, before me even.
Yeah.
He was always, because Dim Mak started as didn't start as an electronic label. So
I didn't know that. What was it?
Yeah, they were. Well, no, it's still called Dim Mak, but
Yeah.
they didn't cross over into electronic music until 2009 or whatever. So with Mastercraft and Bloody Beetroots and all those people. But before that, I think they put out, I'll probably misquote here, but I feel like they put out like Block Party's first EP and weird things like that.
And when you were making the music in the early days, even when you started working with Steve, or maybe even just before, was this just kind of like a hobby thing? You were enjoying it? Were you thinking like, I'm going to break in, I want to do this, I want to be this, I want to do that? Or were you just kind of like, oh, I'm just experimenting, I don't know what I want to do? I'm curious where your mind was.
Yeah, I mean, being a DJ wasn't even a viable career at that time in the global climate, you know. I mean, even to this day, people still ask me if I'm like a wedding DJ. So like that's never gonna go away.
Amazing.
But at that time, it definitely wasn't on like the amount of money that got thrown around 8 years later after that, like around 2012, 2013 was, no one could have predicted that.
Yeah.
That was crazy. But at the time in 2008, 2007, it just was fun. I was young. I was 20 or 21. So I was just like, I don't know, it's fun. I'm gonna keep making these songs that are loud and obnoxious and people seem to like them. I don't know anything about dance floors because I have been to 3 clubs in my entire life. So I don't know anything. And it was just kind of riding this wave of being obnoxious in a youthful punk rock kind of way, making rowdy records. And I just kind of, I mean, my first gig I ever DJ'd, I only played because someone asked me if I could perform and I didn't know what to do. So then I downloaded Ableton, bought a controller and did my first show ever with like a laptop on a stage.
What kind of show was it?
It was actually really good. It was at Richards on Richards in Vancouver. Rest in peace. That venue doesn't exist anymore, but it was crazy. All my friends came out and it was like 400 people. It was nuts.
What kind of music did you play?
Like very heavy electro. So a lot of my stuff, a lot of the Dim Mak stuff, Mastercraft, Boys Noise, Vitalik, probably some, I don't know, Bloody Beetroots, Justice, I'm sure.
Yeah. Those early gig days, did you have any gigs that were like cringy or kind of like something went wrong? Because I'm thinking back to my first gig.
Yeah.
And it definitely had a positive. It was hard to go through at the time, but it had a positive impact on me. I'm curious if you had any moments like that.
I felt 50% of them were cringe and 50% of them were amazing.
And were you like learning on the job, right? Because you kind of have to.
Yeah, I booked my first show before I bought Ableton and then had a month to learn it and just kind of went for it. And I swear to God, this is the level of like DIY that I would show up with my laptop, just bring a red and white cable and then with an aux cord, and I would just plug straight into my headphone jack on my laptop, and that was it, just into the mixer. I was like, I don't know. And then I just turned everything up as loud as it would go.
Yeah.
And hope for the best. It was, I don't know. And I to this day, I feel like that sort of, like that kind of stuff has sort of served me well. I sort of don't really think about, I find a lot of people kind of get hung up on, oh, is this done properly? Is this done, like, is this mixed? Is the thing mixed completely perfectly? And I think a lot of those rules are sort of self-imposed or maybe under the advice of people that aren't always going to like be encouraging to the unpredictability and recklessness that is creation.
Yeah. And how do you balance moving quickly, like not delaying, moving forward, but then also giving enough time to each record? There's a balance there. There's a moment where you know, like, okay, this is done, or it's time to finish this.
Yeah, I would I have a label. I'm signed to a label now, but I would sort of argue that labels are like a necessary evil to kind of put in place the like time you need to sit on a record a little bit. Because like as an artist, you almost want to like send out the record that night, right? And if every record artist did that, like that's usually the worst thing you can do. It's taken me 15 years to learn never send things the day of the session. Like always at least sleep on it.
Yeah.
But you're excited, right? And that's a great thing. And you should bask in that feeling of excitedness and don't send it where then somebody else will be like, I don't know about the kick. And then they've just ruined that whole moment for you. So I'm always like, enjoy that moment where the people who've made it are excited and like keep it to yourself for possibly a month even. And, but yeah, I guess how do I finish things? How do I put things out? It's a bit of, I constantly just try to write and sort of go through I'll just write and then maybe a week later I'll listen to what I made, see if it still has something. And then I kind of like put it in my mental pile of possible thing to finish later.
Yeah.
And then from there, I just sort of impose deadlines on myself. Like I literally just write things on the calendar and be like, this is when this song is due. So and then I will tell my manager or someone to impose that deadline on me and remind me so that there's sort of this, like everything is technically not a real deadline, but it's real if we make it real.
Deadlines is a super helpful hack for me as well.
Yeah.
I find if I like verbally commit to somebody a deadline of when I want to release something or when I want to have a project done, just having that verbal commitment, knowing somebody else that's in their mind, that you've committed to this, that alone is enough for me to be like, okay. And I tend to work more efficiently. And then also things don't delay as much.
100%. I fully agree with that. And I think reliability is such a underappreciated asset. Like having someone that's reliable can make or break like a long-term professional relationship with someone.
100%. And I've noticed that the more that I create and put out, the less hesitant I am. In the very beginning, the stakes seemed so high because it was like, this is my first record. This is my second record. So the stakes seem really high. But then as you're making and releasing, creating, releasing, the stakes kind of go down. You realize that, oh, I'm just going to make more records. It just kind of becomes a process.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this the other day. It's so true. It's why is it so hard to overcome the initial stakes that honestly don't really mean that much. And I think it's hard to put yourself out there. I think that's the kind of like core of it, right? It's a bit of what are people going to think? You're often showing a side of yourself people don't even know exists, which can be really daunting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very empathetic to the scariness of like the blank page and then overcoming the blank page and then and I don't know, once you finish a thing too, it opens up all these other things, promotion, marketing, blah, 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 blah. It's daunting, man. It's crazy. So, but like it's kind of, I kind of compare it to exercise creativity a lot these days where it's just, you get through it by doing it. It's not, there's no I don't really believe in any sort of magical, like I don't put creativity on a pedestal. I just put it as there's this great quote from this author. I can't remember who it was, but it was like, I only write when I'm inspired. Fortunately, that happens every day at 9 a.m.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, if you just set the thing, you will do it. We all have monkey lizard brains that are stupid. And if you just kind of write studio time for this day, that can be really helpful to just kind of get in there and doing it.
Yeah. That reminds me of a quote I came in contact with recently. It's something like, if you haven't discovered what you're passionate about, you haven't created enough things yet.
Oh, I like that.
And it was literally just saying, like, you just need to create more things. Create and create and create. And then you're eventually going to find what you're passionate about. But like, to your point, you have to do the actions. You can't just like sit in your room and think your way through to be like, what do I want to do with my life? You have to do action, just like what you said with running or with the cardio, right? With running, you have to do it. You can't just sit there and think about running.
Yeah, that's really similar to a quote that I love. It's like passion is earned, not like you're not born with it. You have to earn it. Like, so you have to, like, I'm sure you've had conversations with people that look at you as a creative person, and then they are like, they'll say something to you similar to the effect of, but you just know what you want to do, so it's easier for you. And it's not really like, I don't think that's a fair assessment, because it's like, you're saying that someone who's creative like has no doubts or anything. That's insane. Like, of course.
Yeah, if somebody looked at me now, they would say, oh, well, yeah, you know what you want to do. You figured out what you're good at. You're doing it. It's like, well, yes, but, you know, let's go back 10, 15 years. And I was considering going to college for like international business. Like, what the hell is that? Yeah. And I went to school for theater. I tried that. I got a BFA in musical theater, and I was not a theater kid, so I wasn't into it. I did business. I had my own businesses. I've done a lot of different, and that's what I think, like, your 20s is for that, for trying different things.
Totally.
You know, I saw something last night, and it was saying, you know, I think it was Cosmic Academy. Do you ever see their posts?
I've seen a few of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a post that was like, it was saying how Martin Garrix put out a record in his teens, and then in the next year he's headlining festivals. But Don Diablo, it took him 10 years of releasing music before he started headlining. And then it was like Avicii, you know, started putting out music and headlining right away in his 20s. Cascade didn't release his first record until his 30s.
Right.
And it was saying like, it's not too late for you. It's not too soon. Like, it's always on time.
And I almost don't even agree with that post, because I feel like like, I think I heard Martin Garrix was making records when he was like 9. So in a way, he got his first hit 10 years into his career of making dance.
Right.
So, you know what I mean?
That point right there, I think that might be one of the reasons why people do have these like false high stakes of when they're first starting out, or when they feel like this is my first record, is because they hear these like legendary stories about, for instance, like the Avicii documentary, and they're interviewing the manager, and he's like, yeah, Avicii was just sending me a demo every week, and every song was like incredible, and it was this, it ended up being this hit and that, or like you watch the Daft Punk documentary, and you see like the early workings of some of their like massive hits, and it's almost like you hear these stories of these like legends, and the first things they put out get discovered on SoundCloud or MySpace, go viral, and you feel like that has to happen. But for me, and that definitely affected me for a while, but I like forced myself to kind of counter that narrative by trying to find counter narratives, like the Cascade thing, where like he didn't put his first record out till his 30s. I think John Varvatos didn't start pursuing fashion design until his 30s. Yeah. And like Paula Deen, she started cooking, pursuing that, like I at least in her like 50s, later in life.
Yeah, they always use like Anthony Hopkins as an example. He got,
what was his?
Silence of the Lambs when he was like 60 or something, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So like, and that's kind of when he blew up essentially. So, but I also feel like like those, like the stories that you're saying about those artists, like that's also like a storytelling narrative that is tried and true, right? Like people love that like quick rise to stardom story. So I feel like if you were making that documentary and that it had like elements of that, I'd be like, we're going to go with that full bore, because it's a way more compelling documentary.
Yeah. You got on one end, there's like the quick rise and the quick success. And the other end, there's like the Susan Boyle showing up on, I think it was The Voice or America's Got Talent, and just totally like shocking everyone with this incredible voice. And, you know, where they have these, I always laugh when I don't watch these reality shows, but they really lean into like the tragic element of it.
100%.
The mother's cancer, or I was homeless, and this and this. It's inspiring, but I think for the majority of the people, they need to see that you need to be consistent with pursuing what you're passionate or what you're trying to do. Like pursue it for 10 years and then see what happens.
Yeah, I've started saying that to kids when they ask me for my advice, because sometimes kids will DM me and be like, give me advice for like someone starting. And I was like, yeah, tell me how long you think it'll take for you to make something that has an impact. And they'll be like, 3 years. And I'll be like, okay, times that by 4. And if you're down still, then do it.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, I don't know what the multiplier is. Depends what they say. I don't want to make it seem too crazy, but something like that, like at least double it. You know what I mean? And then if you're still down in your head, then you got the kind of, I think that's a good place to start. Just being more patient. Like patience is, oh man. And I am the same, like patience is the hardest thing. It's such a hard thing to explain. It's a hard thing to wrap your brain around. And I think about this, I have a lot of music out now, but I never once was young and be like, wow, I can't wait till I have a catalog. Like that'll be so cool. Like that's not a thought you have when you're starting. But now looking back, I'm like proud of all the things I've done. And it's another cool thing that I never even thought about when I started. So now that I kind of feel that, I'm like, I kind of like how this feels, sort of just having a body of work that I'm proud of. So I'm just going to try to like keep doing that. And I really just try to simplify things lately. I'm just like, all right, everything good that has ever happened in my career has happened because of a song that people have liked. So I'm just going to keep trying to make songs and like, just make it like don't overcomplicate it. I've had times on social media or whatever, if you get caught up in engagement and stuff and you're like, why aren't people commenting or whatever the hell it is, or whatever dumb, weak social media moment we all have. And I'm like, well, what am I offering? Like, I just want people to comment on a post for no reason. Like, that's stupid. Like, so I tried to remember, like, just make the thing that people initially found you for, which is music, and try to over deliver, like just try to give more value. And then, it's like, like people are always going to be appreciative if you just try to give things to them, and then they can decide what they want to do with that,
Yeah, I love this idea of the focusing on value. That's something that I focus on too now. So really only with like the last year or two that became obvious to me that's what I should just focus solely on, trying to create value. And then also listening to you talk about kind of the amount of time to dedicate towards something, how long you think it's going to take to pursue this, and then times it by however many, 3, 4. That's getting me thinking to like, first of all, your music. I want to get into these songs, but it was taking me back to one of your songs, Mine. And I want to talk about kind of like this, like what we went through just starting out, and kind of get into more of these songs. But we're going to take a quick break first.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back, and we're going to dive into the Into Sunsets album and more of this with Felix Cartal on Adobe Radio. Welcome back to Life Rhythms Radio Show. I'm your host, Ryan Skyy. I've got with me Vancouver, Canadian-based DJ and electronic music producer Felix Cartal, back with us for the second segment. And we're featuring his album, Into Sunsets, which we played a clip of coming into this segment. Now, Felix, we've got a new segment for you called The People's Perspective.
Okay.
Now, what it is The People's Perspective, I drive rideshare and I pick up a passenger, and it's basically like I want to get the public's perspective on your music, on a topic related to one of your songs. Yeah. So I drove rideshare, I picked up a passenger, and I asked her about one of your songs. The one that resonated with her was Love Me.
Cool.
So with Love Me, for those listening in, just to give you an idea of some of the lyrics, in Love Me, she's talking about, I'm trying to stay cool, right? She's talking about like, I'm trying not to let these mind games play me. I should have ghosted you at 2, but I waited it out for you. So I was looking at these lyrics, Felix, and I was thinking to myself, like, it's a little bit like kind of toxic, you could say. I don't love that word, but more about like playing games with dating, right?
Yeah.
So in The People's Perspective, I wanted to get her input on this. So I'm going to play this for you, and then we can talk about it.
Okay.
All right, let's see what she had to say. So my guest this week, Felix Cartal, we're featuring his album. I'm curious about dating in China. because one of the other songs on the album is called Love Me. And when I was looking at the lyrics of Love Me, it's all very like the two people are like playing games with each other. Do people play games in China?
Yes, they always play games with each other, I think. Most of the people nowadays, they don't show their real heart to each other. They just want to try the other person's heart.
They want the other person to show how they feel first.
Yeah. Most of us experience some bad relationship in our life. So we don't trust anyone.
Can you think of any specific games, like types of games that people play on each other in China?
Do you know WeChat? They just send the message to the boy or to the girl. And actually the girl or the boy, when they saw the message, they decide to not reply to this message immediately because they want to, I have some other things to do. I don't want to immediately reply to your message, which means I'm pay much attention to you. Actually, I'm the one to play the games. To be honest.
How's it working out?
I think some works, but other ones.
Does it work?
Yeah.
That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
There we go.
Well, good to know that the texting games are not just a North American problem.
Yeah, I found that interesting that it's truly universal that they're doing it in China.
That makes sense. People are the same everywhere, I think, on the human level, maybe.
What do you think it is? Where do you think that comes from, us playing games with each other when we do it?
I think it's just I think she kind of hit the nail on the head. You're trying to be protective of yourself from something, in the past that has hurt you. So I don't think people are always playing games maliciously. I think they might be playing them even with like a good intention, maybe. But then there's obviously also people who do it intentionally on purpose, which that I have no patience for. But
yeah.
I think sometimes people might be playing a game without even knowing it. And that's something that you learn to work with, usually with a partner who understands you, that can help express the things that maybe you can improve on in a way that is a nice way of saying it to you rather than in a way that's attacking.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. From my own experience, when I've played games in the past, it was only because I didn't know what I was doing. It's like, I think it comes down to a few things. I think it comes down to, like she had said, wanting to protect yourself. So it's kind of like a learned behavior. It's kind of like an adaptation to try an adaptive strategy to try and protect yourself. And then also too, I think if somebody is not skilled in dating or they kind of like pick up these things in movies or they see other people act a certain way and they kind of feel like that's the way it has to go. And for me, like, go ahead.
No, I said that's a great point. Yeah. They're like kind of mirroring things you've seen in popular media.
Yeah. So like when I played games in the past, it's just because I thought that's just how it goes. But then once I started actually working on myself, like really working on myself, and also studying, because I played games and I screwed up a bunch of times, like I screwed up a bunch of good potential matches, but the pain of losing that, like the pain of screwing it up, is what sends me. I don't know if everyone responds this way, but for me, I start looking for answers. I'm like, okay, ouch, I don't want to feel this again. What went wrong?
Yeah. That makes sense. I think, I think the most nice way to put it is a lot of the people that play games need to learn that they're even playing that game, at least in someone else's eyes, and then how to sort of adjust. And also, like, something that could be a game to one partner could maybe not be a game to another partner too. So I think, unfortunately, it's sort of like a case by case basis sometimes. Sometimes people are really some people are just kind of spacey and unresponsive, and some people are totally fine with that. Yeah. And some people it's the biggest kind of irk ever to them. So sometimes it's a compatibility issue at the end of the day too. It might not be a specific game that they're playing. It might just be a wrong match too.
That's a really good point about perspective, because it's about the meaning you assign to things. So totally. The one person may not be playing games, like you had said. Maybe they're just a spacey person. Maybe they're not good at time management. But the
Yeah.
other person, they may perceive that as playing games because they put a meaning on it, like, oh, he's purposefully not getting back to me. He's purposefully like waiting to respond.
Totally.
Or acting not that interested when maybe the person's busy. Like actually, I messaged somebody on Tinder. We exchanged numbers, and then we talked a little bit through text. And I was gonna set up I do like a FaceTime before I actually like would ever go on a date with somebody. I do like a FaceTime thing.
Nice.
So I set up a FaceTime. I asked when he was available to FaceTime, and there was no response. Or because he asked me what my Instagram was, so I gave him my Instagram, and then I didn't hear back like at all for weeks. And the stories in my mind was like, oh, he checked out my Instagram. He doesn't like me. I don't look like my photos, or I don't know, like those kinds of things. But I didn't say anything. I just like, well, no, maybe something came up, and I just let it go. And I just was like, well, I just let it go. And then all of a sudden he texted me yesterday and he was like, hey, I was out of town, like in the middle of nowhere with my family. And, I'm back now. And yeah, I'm free this week. Like, so I don't mind. Like, I don't know what the real reason is, but I kind of laugh in my own mind, how my mind always kind of goes to those extreme places, but I never act on it. I like accept like, okay, that's what I'm thinking, but that's probably not the case. So let me just like, let this go.
Yeah. No, I not acting on it sometimes is like, that's a really hard thing to learn.
That's everything. That's everything.
Man, I've been thinking about that so much lately, just because I actually feel like you brought it up in one of my songs, and then I was going to talk about one of these things.
Okay.
With like the highs and lows thing. You had mentioned a lyric in the Life track that you'd sent me over before.
Yeah.
And I was constantly thinking about, it's what you just said, like not reacting to something in the moment and just sort of being realistic that life has that up and down flow. And that's something that I've tried to do as I've gotten older, is like just realizing when you're having a bad day that like it's okay, and like sometimes bad days happen, and rather than it like destroying your week or something, just like, I don't know, it's just today's one of those days, and then it'll come around again. Like those feelings always do pass, but I think when I was younger, I would always be like, is this ever going to go away? And it always does. But being sort of at least reasonable about the expectation that those things are fleeting I find just helps sort of be more grounded in those situations that are often high stress.
It was a relief to me when I realized that yes, the negative stuff is fleeting, but also the positive stuff is fleeting.
Totally.
Like the highs are fleeting and the lows are fleeting.
Yeah.
So don't put too much stock in any of it.
Yeah. Just kind of like, I describe it as surfing these days, even though I don't surf, but I'm like, you're just on the wave. Sometimes sometimes the wave comes in and sometimes the wrong wave comes in, but there's always more waves. And
that's true. Yeah.
How you surf, I have no idea.
You had mentioned your song, The Life on your album.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned about the lyric specifically for those listening. It's the highs and lows woke me up. That was the lyric that I was really interested in, that lyric, because I feel like there's moments in our life where there's a high or a low moment that has the potential to shape our future, depending on like how we kind of going back to the meaning we place on it, and then also what we do with that moving forward. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, have there been any moments that you can think of in your life that have had an effect on you one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of moments obviously that have had big effects. I think you kind of touch on a nice thing with kind of like the highs, and also realizing that those are fleeting too. I think that is something I try to be conscious of not getting caught up in your like own thing. Like regardless of like the reaction to anything that you make, like at the end of the day, like you're still the same person just trying to like work on your thing or work on stuff. So
yeah,
I'm always like, and I think the highs and lows thing, it helps just focusing on, I try to focus on process and less on the outcome. And then whatever kind of happens with the outcome, I'm sort of like already washed of it before it happens either way, so that I'm already kind of working on the next thing, I guess. So
yeah,
I think that was sort of touches earlier on what you said about the dauntingness of the first thing. that's not a word, dauntingness, how daunting the first thing could be.
Yeah.
I think too, like kind of if you just sort of focus on what you're working on, then if you have a day where something goes really well, but you have something else to work on that day, I actually find that to be extremely protective, and kind of like maintaining your sanity. Like my favorite thing to do on release day now is like schedule a studio session with other people and just work on a new song.
Oh, wow.
Because I'll just get caught up in like trying to be like, is the song doing well? And one, I can't change anything. Like it's already out. Not like checking stuff is not going to change the effect of anything. And two, like how can you even tell how something does in 24 hours? Like it's like completely silly.
Yeah.
So my thing is like, I like to make songs, so I'm just going to do what I like to do. And I find when I work on music with other people, I forget about everything else. And I just find that to be like a really helpful tactic to sort of like protect myself from any sort of insecurities that may come with a release day, which have been stressing me out a little bit lately, release days.
You've had a lot of release days lately.
I know, and they still stress me out, so got to have these protective measures in place.
Yeah, it's such a wild experience to create something that didn't exist and then now it exists and you're putting it out in the world and your name's attached to it. Like when you first came forward with your name, Felix Cartal.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? Like, did you use that name? Has that always been your DJ name, or was that part of the punk name?
That's always just been my DJ name. Yeah.
Because when I was in college and I first came up with Ryan Skyy, Sky's not my legal last name. I was like embarrassed about it. I remember I was timid, and people for a very short period of time, my peers were like, Ryan Skyy, like they were like, who does he think he is? Like Ryan Skyy, like giving himself a name, like what is that? There was like that little bit of moment of pushback, and I held my ground, and inside I was feeling like insecure and vulnerable and like, oh, it's stupid, but I just held my ground. I was just like, didn't let it affect me, and they let it go. And I think part of it is we testing. I think people just have this natural ability to test.
Yeah.
I think they wanted to see my conviction with it. It could have been projecting some of their insecurities. But either way, like there was this little brief period, and now I don't even think about my name. You know?
Yeah.
It's like I use it everywhere, and it's like not a big deal. And it's funny. What was it? Did it matter with you? Or were you just like, no, this is my name?
Well, I think that the way I came up with it was maybe a bit different. It was not really this plan of I have to decide on my pseudonym for the rest of my life, because I just was kind of making songs and needed to put them on a MySpace for just because I wanted. This is how old I am. But just kind of putting them out, and I just had to make a name that day, and I didn't really think too much of it, to be honest. I liked names that sound like names.
Yeah.
I've always liked that, and that was kind of it. And I think it was probably like at least 8 months or something until someone even said that name out loud to me for the first time. So like I didn't really make an announcement or anything on my Facebook or whatever it was. It was just kind of like, I just kind of putting out songs, and then eventually I started playing shows, and then people were like, good show, Felix. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's what people will call me at these shows. And it was sort of a soft launch.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. For me, I didn't like put out a press release or something, you know, but when I think about it, I think, so my legal last name is Schmidt, Ryan Schmidt. And I think when I was first starting out in college, I recognized that the current version of myself was like there was a gap between the current version of myself and like what I saw from myself, what I thought because at that point I didn't know anything about music production, very little about songwriting. I could play piano and sing, but I knew that there was like, definitely had this journey I needed to go on to become what I had in my head. And I felt like Ryan Schmidt was representative of where I was at. And that kind of like, for me, it kind of going back to what we said about taking that, kind of like with the deadlines where you make that verbal commitment to something. For me, I knew that like if I just put it out in the world like this name, that will kind of like start the ball rolling for me. And it really did. It just forced me down the path of like, okay, we're doing it. We're an artist. This is the name. Like, okay, what's next? Like, let's start writing songs. Let's start learning. I started out on Reason as well. and
Sick.
Cubase. And is
Same.
that the one where you can flip it around and you can plug, right? You can plug the cords in.
And I still
cables?
never really understood that.
That was like such a cool little feature.
Was cool.
Like
Overly complicated though.
yeah. Just to explain to listeners. So in a studio with hardware, you've got hardware, right? With physical cables that are plugging in and out of the different inputs and outputs of the hardware for recording in the studio. But the reason is a software production that tried to mimic that hardware setup. So visually they would, it was all software, but they would visually give you like photos of each of the racks, quote unquote. Yeah. And then you could like, I don't know if you hit escape or tab or something, and it would flip it around. And then now you could see the back of the rack, and you could like manually with your mouse, you're like pulling out cables and plugging them in. It's really,
I love how you would like spin it, and then like the cords would jiggle. Like it was like the little animations they added were so unnecessary, but so good.
Are you on Ableton now or Logic or?
Ableton, yeah.
Yeah, I'm on Ableton. I really like Ableton.
Me too. And it was hard for me to switch, to be honest. I was scared. So,
do you still use Pro Tools?
No, not really. Like I haven't opened Pro Tools, and
yeah,
I don't even know why I said not really. Definitely, just no.
Do you do Ableton for vocal as well?
I do. Yeah, I've been using they have a new comping feature, which is pretty.
I was just gonna say that's huge. Yeah.
But I don't know. Recording vocals is still like my least favorite part of production.
Comping, yeah.
The worst. So a lot of the times, if I can work on a record with someone and they have a vocal engineer that they like to work with, I'll just be like, you just send me the vocal that you recorded with your vocal engineer, and then this song will come out 1 year earlier.
Yeah. Felix, I want to get back to your Into Sunsets album.
Yeah. And I just said, I just like want the vocalist to have their voice sound like how they like it. That's always my.
Can we talk about the song Mine?
Yeah, of course.
I want to talk about, let me pull up the lyrics here. Some of the lyrics, it's talking about, the song opens with, I remember we were too broke to have a car. And one of the other lyrics is about sleeping on the hardwood floor. And immediately I just was like, ooh, yeah, this reminds me of like, when I first started out as an artist, I was willing to have a quality of life that was a bit suspect, Like I was willing to go through some things to pursue what I was pursuing that I don't know if I'd be willing to do now. Do you know what I mean? And I'm curious, I'd love to learn about like those early Felix days. Like, do you have any fun stories of like what life was like for you?
Yeah, I mean, when I used to tour, because when I first started touring, I did a lot of my first shows in the UK because I was going to school in Glasgow at the time. And then, so I kind of like made some connects over in Europe. And when I would come back, like I couldn't afford anything. So, I was getting paid 300 euros for a show kind of type thing. And the flight would be 280 euros. So I was like, all right, 20 euros. The drinks are free, right? Yeah. And then, so yeah, just sleeping on people's couches and all that. I was doing back to the punk rock days for sure. But I remember just being stoked when people would let me crash at their house for multiple days. And it was very much that for a full year, if not more. And I remember making one of my remixes in my friend's closet because he set up a sleeping bag for me in his closet because his flat was so small in Edinburgh. Yeah. And I was like totally content. And he was like, what are you doing? I'm like, I just finished up this remix. He's like, great. But no one knows that when the remix comes out that it was made. I mean, maybe if they heard it, they would know it was made in a closet because of how bad it probably sounded at the time. But
oh man,
it's a good time.
When you think back to these moments, did it seem like the universe was kind of like telling you, yes, this is the path for you. Look at these people; they're helping you. They're letting you stay with them. Were there these kind of like moments that were serendipitous?
I think there was. It's like it felt like the timing had worked out in a weird way in that sense. I just felt And I felt that way when I first kind of heard like Justice, Boys Noise, all those things. I kind of felt like I just found out about it a little bit earlier than everyone else. And I felt like on the sort of cusp of, I felt like I was in the know on the cusp of something that possibly was going to go bigger than, and I never could have imagined that scene getting as big as it did. Like, I always thought that stuff was weird stuff that normies wouldn't like, you know, like it always felt very like underground culture to me. And even for me, I was like, I don't know if I belong in this, but it's fun to try to make these records and all these things. And everyone seems very accepting and everyone's having a good time. So I liked all those things about it. But I did feel like there were certain moments where I could tell, oh, I know about this sort of world of this type of music that is bubbling up that no one has really been exposed to yet. And that like did feel exciting at the time, even though a lot of those shows were like horrible. Like it's not like like looking back, it feels like every show was crazy, but that's not the case. A lot of those shows were ridiculous and small. But I'll give you a perfect anecdote for this. It was when I lived in Glasgow, the third show I ever played, I opened for Justice in Glasgow. Wow. So it was like me, Busy P, and then Justice. And I was going to school at the University of Glasgow on exchange. And I just kind of like told the kids at my flat that like the other students who were abroad, so people from Wisconsin and all these random states and all these things. And I just told them, oh, I'm DJing this show tonight if you guys want to come. And everyone was like, sure, yeah, we'll come support you. Wow. I'm pretty sure they were thinking they're going to come to a bar and watch like your friend play party records. And then basically I exposed all these people to that scene for the first time. And it was 2,500 people in this tunnel underneath the train tracks. And it was this crazy rave. No one in my school knew anything about that scene. And it was just kind of this cool moment where I got to like show off this, like people were just like, what even was that? You know, like one of those kind of moments.
And did you kind of, going through that experience, did it kind of shift the way you saw yourself? Because it's almost like, if I went through that, it's almost like I might have a shift thinking that I might start to see myself as like, or maybe trust my instincts, like in terms of like being into something that people haven't quite discovered yet, or maybe seeing yourself as like somebody who can kind of show people something that's about to happen.
Yeah, I definitely am very grateful to like the level of reassurance that I got early on that some of these weird records were cool. Like, you know, a lot of like the DJs I looked up to sort of started playing them and they were sort of looking for this sort of weird scene to find weird records. And I got kind of thrown into it a little bit. So it didn't really, there was no like, am I going to make money from music? It was more just like, these people who I respect, some of them respect some of these songs I'm making for some weird reason. So I'm going to keep just doing this and sort of see where it goes. But I there was no plan really at the time. It was more just, this is fun making these songs. I don't know what this scene will be. I was always terrified that EDM was going to die in like 1 year because, I mean, the word EDM wasn't even invented yet, but I was always like, is this going to be like new metal where like this is going to be cool for a year?
Yeah.
And then no one will ever care again. So fortunately that didn't happen, but I don't know. It was just fun. It honestly was, I was young and it was fun and I didn't want to do my schoolwork. So I would just make songs instead of doing my essays. And that was basically it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Felix, we're at the end of the show here. Such a pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thanks so much for this is so fun. I love actually doing an in-depth convo rather than a 5-minute where did you come up with your name question or what's your favorite city to DJ and my least favorite.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, yeah, the show's life rhythm, so it's about mixing kind of the music, the stories behind the music, that personal growth slant of it. And I'm with you. I'm not good at small talk. I need to connect with people on a deeper level when possible.
As Larry David once says, you want to elevate to medium talk.
To what?
you want to elevate to medium talk.
Yeah, at least medium talk is a minimum for me. Yeah, I can't fake it. So everyone listening and watching on streaming platforms, listening on Adobe Radio, check out Felix Cartal online and his album Into Sunsets. And we loved having you on.
Thanks for having me on. It was my pleasure.
All right.